We begin today's video in Britain. Please don't immediately click off. It's June 1st, 1898, and a crowd of 30,000 people have gathered at a pier in Leamouth, looking out over the River Thames. Today would be a historic day. In just a few moments, the Royal Navy was set to launch their newest warship, a Canopus-class vessel named the HMS Albion. This ship was intended for service in Asia, being stationed in Hong Kong in 1901, later going on to serve during World War I. But before it could head to the Asian continent, it had to be launched, which brings us back to June 1st, 1898. At this time, enough construction was complete on the ship for it to enter the water, which attracted a ton of attention. This would be the largest ship to ever enter the River Thames, and it marked the first warship to be completed by the British company Thames Iron Works in over a decade. In addition, the Duchess of York was set to christen the ship. This was shaping up to be a holiday, and many people called off work and schools across the area shut down. Again, gathering a crowd estimated at 30,000 people, all watching and waiting for this ship to enter the water. Among this crowd, 4 filmmakers stood, ready to capture the momentous event for all of history to see. These 4 filmmakers were E.P. Prestwich, Philip Wolfe, Robert Paul, and Burr, all armed with cameras. But with everyone in position to record, a bottle of champagne was smashed against the side of the ship, a tradition for all new vessels about to make their first voyage. But notably, it took 3 tries for it to shatter, a sign of bad luck for the superstitious, who were proven right this time. As disaster struck, the ship reached the waters of the Thames, and it sent up a massive wave that crashed into a temporary gangway constructed for the massive crowd to stand on. In total, 100 people were standing on this thing, despite nearby warnings touting it as unsafe, a warning that should have been heeded, as the gangway snapped, and all 100 people went into the river. This crowd consisted of mainly women and children, whose cries for help were initially ignored, drowned out by the billowing of the ship's horn. Once the disaster was realized, many people jumped into the river to help rescue them. Despite these efforts, 34 people lost their lives, with the oldest victim being 64 years old and the youngest only 3 months. All of this was recorded, and we can discuss the status of these films, starting with Prestwich. He stopped filming as soon as the ship made it through the water, and his film survives today. Paul's footage also survived, but he did not capture actual collapse of the gangway. He recorded the launch and the subsequent recovery following the tragedy. He showed this film off publicly, leading to people disavowing him, including his former film partner and the aforementioned official recorder of the event, Burr, who recorded the entire ordeal, start to finish. He deemed his own recording unethical, and in his own words, wished to disassociate myself in the most empathetic manner possible from the producers of these photographs, meaning none of his footage has survived, and it was never shown off. This leaves Wolfe, perhaps the most mysterious cameraman, whose filming position was not even known. It is known that he took 120 feet of film, meaning it's likely that the entire disaster was recorded, but he has never shown it publicly. The 1800s saw a century of change that forever shaped our world. From the early days of America's rise to the worldwide industrial revolution and everything in between, most importantly, including our advances in technology. But while our tech progressed, our preservation stagnated. So many important pieces of the century were left behind, including the earliest recorded films, the first ever photos taken, and countless important books, scripts, and speeches that shaped our world, now lost to the pages of history. Here is just one set of lost media from the 1800s. Let's begin boldly by discussing a combination of religion and politics, 2 things that should never cross paths. A lot of America's founding fathers had a strange relationship with religion, to be more exact, Christianity. And today's discussion involves Thomas Jefferson. He did fall under the Christian umbrella, but he held different beliefs in the traditional divinity. He didn't believe that the original sin took place. He didn't believe in the miracles that Jesus performed or his resurrection, but he did believe in an all-powerful yet benevolent divine figure, the Abrahamic God. A pretty complicated belief system to have, especially for the 1800s. Jefferson did a lot of personal research to better define his beliefs, and in the process, compiled two religious texts. The first one, The Philosophy of Jesus of Nazareth, and the second one, The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth. The second text is still available today, and it features a heavily trimmed down Bible, also put into chronological order, all while trimming the supernatural aspects of the Bible. But this version, as we said, is available to buy and read. Here it is on Amazon, $8. But the version before the Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth, the Philosophies, is missing. Jefferson first got the idea for his book in 1803, detailing how he wanted to write his own personal view of the Bible, setting out to do so. In a letter to his on-again off-again friend John Adams, he said this: "In extracting the pure principles of which he taught, we should have to strip off the artificial vestments in which they have been muffled by priests, who have travestized them into multiple forms, as instruments of riches and powers to them." Further down, "We must reduce our volume to the simple evangelist. Select even from them the very words only of Jesus." This book, which he never referred to as a Bible, was heavily trimmed down, only being, in his words, 46 pages of pure and unsophisticated doctrine. This Bible was only the words spoken by Jesus. Jefferson expressed discontent with his early version, and the Life and Morals version of his text would come from it. But this leaves the question of the original text. We don't know fully what it was. It was said to be assembled from 4 Gospels as a part of the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This discontent was almost immediately felt, and work on his new version would begin afterwards. After Jefferson's death in 1826, the book was not among the texts preserved by his family, leaving their true, specific contents unknown. On April 6, 1898, the 27th Football Association season would come to an end as Nottingham Forest faced off against Derby County at the Crystal Palace. This was the first ever FA Cup to be recorded by camera, being done so by Bert Acres, the same guy before, responsible for recording the HMS Albion's launch. In a 3-1 score, Nottingham Forest won their first ever FA Cup, only winning it one other time in history. 61 years later, in 1859, Derby would win their first in 1946. Unfortunately, not a single frame of video surrounding the 1898 FA Cup final has survived, leaving us with only still frames and photographs of the match and the subsequent victory celebration. The 1899 FA Cup final is also recorded, and it's missing. The 1900 Cup wasn't recorded at all, and the 1901 FA Cup final is the first one in history to still have surviving footage. In 1898, a man named James Freer was hired by the Canadian Pacific Railway to create a documentary on the province, not state, like I screwed up in the last video, of Manitoba. The documentary was meant to serve as a promotional campaign for Canada as a whole, for it to be shown in the United Kingdom to encourage people to move there. The film consisted of short scenes, showing off everyday life and work in Manitoba. It was originally thought to be a project solely created by James Freer, but when the Manitoba Historical Society did a deeper dive on the topic last year, they found that it was a collaboration, as a bartender from Winnipeg and an American filmmaker named E.H. Emmett also recorded scenes, giving them to Freer for his documentary. 10 Years in Manitoba was a success, being shown in Britain a handful of times, and it later led to more Canadian promotional films being made by Freer. But today, we have nothing from this documentary. Only scene descriptions. We know of at least 5, and they are as follows: 6 binders at work in 100-acre wheat field, harvesting scene with trains passing by, Pacific and Atlantic mail trains, and arrival of CPR Express at Winnipeg. While not named, we know of 2 other scenes that were shown. One that depicted Freer's house, alongside his family, and a scene of Thomas Greenway, the then Premier of Manitoba, stooking grain at his own estate. Again, none of these scenes have survived today. Our next entry is an all-encompassing story. The lost audio recordings created by the phonautograph, the earliest device with the capability of recording sound. How this thing would work: you'd talk into that big horn, and the sound waves would vibrate a stylus that traced the vibrations into a piece of paper covered in soot. It was created by French inventor Edward Leon Scott de Martinville in 1859, keep that date in mind. But it wouldn't be until 2008, 150 years later, that the phonautograms were able to be replayed. This was achieved by a team of researchers on firstsounds.org, who scanned these sound files with a computer, converting them into a digital audio file. After this was done, the surviving files were played back, giving us the oldest recorded sound. While this sounds like the stuff of nightmares, that is someone, believed to be Martinville himself, singing a French song called Au clair de la lune. Alright, that's great and all, but we're in a lost media video, so what's missing? 20 years worth of recordings. Martinville was fascinated by his device, and he recorded hundreds of sounds. Ticking clocks, string instruments, distant voices, anything he wanted to, really. But the real famous piece of lost phonogram recordings is the rumor that Martinville recorded the voice of Abraham Lincoln. It's said that Edward was at the White House in 1863, 6 years after the device was invented. While here, it's rumored that he recorded the president's opinion on slavery. What happened to this alleged recording is not exactly known. Some believe Thomas Edison attempted to create a device that could play back these phonograms, but it was faulty, leading to the recording being destroyed. Others say it's stashed in the White House archives, and others say it was never recorded at all. Regardless of Lincoln's voice, the oldest surviving recording of a president's voice is that of Benjamin Harrison's, the 23rd president. This recording was done in 1889, 26 years after Lincoln's voice was allegedly recorded. Regardless, Lincoln's voice and tons of other phonogram recordings are missing today. On July 11th, 1804, then United States Vice President Aaron Burr and former Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton would enter into a duel. This was the culmination resulted from years of bitter rivalry, and the duel ended, of course, with Burr hitting Hamilton. The next day, the Treasury Secretary would pass away. For the rest of Burr's life, he was hated for this heinous act. He initially fled to Georgia, but did have to come back to Washington for his duties as vice president, which would come to an end in 1805. He served with President Thomas Jefferson, and in this time, the runner-up in an election was deemed the vice president. But Jefferson changed this, allowing each candidate to pick their own vice president, and he did not pick Burr. So, with a murder, a one-term vice presidency, and a history of hiding his beliefs on his back, Burr's political career was essentially over. In March of 1805, following the re-election of Thomas Jefferson and his new chosen vice president, George Clinton, Burr was set to deliver a final address to the United States Senate. He was said to have spoke for 20 to 30 minutes, but no one bothered to record what he said in full. Only a small segment remains today. I'll read from it. This house is a sanctuary, a citadel of law, of order, and of liberty. And it is here, in the exalted refuge, here, if anywhere, will resistance be made to the storms of political frenzy and the silent act of corruption. After Burr's speech was finished, he left the grounds of Congress in silence, his footsteps echoing off the grand halls. It was said some senators silently wept, but most remained quiet. It's not fully known what the vice president said in that half an hour, but it must have been moving. Oh, and then he fled to Blennerhassett Island and tried to instill a coup that would have led to the takeover of the United States South. The British colleges of Cambridge and Oxford host an annual boat rowing race, and the 1895 one was the first one to be recorded. At this time in history, Thomas Edison had a patent on his kinetoscope, an early camera that captured tons of frames in a reel. With a light source, these frames were played back to back, giving the illusion of movement. Again, an early camera. Edison did patent this, but the patent didn't apply to Europe. leading to Robert Paul ripping off the design, building his own for the European market. From here, Paul met with Burr. If these two names sound familiar, they're the ones who recorded the HMS Albion. These two created their bootleg camera, known as the Paul Acres camera, real creative name, and they began to record films. In total, 13 of them were created, and this entry is one of the 13. The film was that of the Oxford-Cambridge boat race. It took place on March 30th, 1895, and the race lasted for 20 minutes, seeing another victory for Oxford. The duo of Acres and Paul only recorded the last minute of the race, including Oxford's victory over Cambridge. This was the first ever British sports film, and it was shown to a wider audience, albeit backed by controversy. Acres and Paul soon split for their own endeavors, in a parting that turned ugly, each one of the men slandering one another in the press. Paul touted himself as the sole European film manufacturer, and Acres took his name off their camera patent, now calling it the Acres camera. Despite their split, Acres showed his film all over Britain, and it is lost today. No copies exist, and only still frames from the race have surfaced. The race still takes place today, and the first radio broadcast of it took place in 1927, and the first television broadcast was in 1938. The radio broadcast is completely lost, and the TV showing is partially lost. In my research of lost silent films, there is no name I find myself saying more than George Meleis. I love this guy's story, and one day I will be making a documentary about him, mark my words. Meleis was the pioneer in film, often called the father of science fiction, as he used early adaptations of special effects. His most famous film is A Trip to the Moon, made in 1902, which depicts a group of scientists flying to the moon. Meleis dedicated his life to his craft, creating over 500 films between 1896 to 1913, all ranging in lengths. We know of 520 movies he made, while only 200 of them are available today. 27 of them exist in pieces, and the other 293 films are completely gone. This stretches over 17 years, but let's discuss his films from the 1800s. In total, he made 236 of them. Of this number, 48 of them survive. 5 of them are in fragments, and a staggering 183 films are missing. Why is this? Well, in this time, film preservation wasn't a practice people cared about. No one thought, hey, I watched this movie, I might like to watch it again later, so no one cared to save them. World War I also came around to France, and Meleis' studio was seized, and the silver canisters used to house his film were melted down. This frustrated Meleis, and he intentionally destroyed a lot of his movies. When people started to care about film preservation, they began to seek out his massive catalog, leaving us with what we do have today. Burr Acres is here again with yet another lost film, and this one is another milestone in the world of movies. It was the first ever commercial to be created. Bryant and May was a British company that produced matches, and they hired Burr Acres to make a commercial for their product. This is about where everything we know comes to an end, as everything else is disputed. First of all, we don't fully know what the commercial consisted of. 2 reports from newspapers of the time survive, and they are completely different from one another. According to an issue of Tower Hamlets Independent and East End Local Advertiser released in August of 1896, the film was said to consist of a man standing before a blackboard. He writes Bryant and May's matches are the best before he turns around and lights one, bringing it to his pipe, to which he smokes from. In another magazine, it was claimed that the man wrote Support Home Industries. Bryant and May's matches are only manufactured at Fairfield Works, London. And from here, we can conclude that 2 of these films were shown in theaters with a different appeal, simply claiming their product is the best, and the other one encouraging people to shop locally. Regardless of these 2 versions that may have existed, we don't have a single frame from either of them. This ties back into an idea of a lack of film preservation. If people weren't keeping actual movies that people paid to go watch, why would they keep old commercials? Because of the loss of Bryant and May, The oldest commercial that still survives is Admiral Cigarettes, made by Thomas Edison to promote the Admiral brand of cigarettes. This commercial was made in July of 1897, 1 year after Bryant and May was made. In 1878, Qin Dynasty China was attending many national events, but they had no national anthem or song of any kind to represent them, and Zhong Jiza set out to fix this. Jiza was an ambassador to 3 different countries in his time: France, the United Kingdom, and Russia. And oftentimes, these other nations had their anthems played, and China had nothing to present, undoubtedly embarrassing him on several occasions. So he set out to fix this, writing a song called Tian Yue, Mandarin for Whole Sky Song. This is often called the first national anthem of China, but it was never officially adapted by the Qin government. It was a song with lyrics and a backing track, but we only have parts of it today. Like we said, the Qin government never officially adapted it for mainland use, and it was only used for international events. Because of this, the song was mostly forgotten in China, only being rediscovered in the 1980s by a music historian named Lao Fushu, lamenting that the full version of the song is missing. What does survive is a good part of the song, including a full instrumental track recorded by the Victor Military Band on September 18, 1914. Also, some parts of the lyrics remain, and they are as follows. Who united the old nation, the ancient Asian civilization of 4,000 years, but most lamentable, Judea, India, and Poland, the hatred of losing their country, it is heartbreaking to discuss. China wouldn't have an official anthem until 1911, with the song Gongjin U, Cup of Solid Gold. 6 days after this song was adapted, the Qin dynasty fell, bringing in the Chinese Republic. On June 18, 1898, a man named Alfonso Segreto was en route from his home in Italy to Brazil. He took with him a Lumiere model camera for personal use, while also carrying with him other film and camera equipment to hopefully sell across the country. He was traveling on the ship Brazil, and as it pulled toward the Guanabara Bay, he was amazed by the view. Guanabara Bay is located off the coast of Rio de Janeiro, and Alfonso was absolutely enamored by the sight. So whether it was for his own personal viewing or to help aid in his commercial practices, he recorded the ship coming into the bay. This is all we know. It was only mentioned a single time in a single newspaper, and it wasn't shown to anyone. No frames remain, and we don't even know how long it was. But we do know it was a film and not like a single picture. This is one of, possibly even the oldest film to come out of Brazil, but again, it is lost today. We can end today's video with how I typically end videos, the strangest story involving whatever topic it is we're discussing. And that trend continues today as we're discussing a major milestone in human development, the first ever adult film to be created, Le Coucher De La Mariee, which is French for Bedtime for the Bride. It was a film created in 1896 by Albert Kirchner under a pseudonym of Lear. The film was based off a play entitled of the same name, and in total, it lasted for 7 minutes. But don't get too excited, we're in 1896, and this is what the film was about. After a couple gets married, they go to their bedroom. The husband is beyond excited to share the bed, but his wife tells him to step out so she can undress. She has several layers of clothing on, and with the removal of each layer, the husband grows impatient, cleaning the nearby area, wiping his brow and his hair, and even taking out a newspaper to read. That's it. We only have 3 minutes out of the 7 that were created, so who knows what happens in those remaining 4. Kirchner would later go on to have a long and prolific career in film, and his claim to fame is actually a 1897 film entitled The Passion of Christ, which gives him the very unique and contradictory title of the first director of an adult film, and the first one to depict Jesus on camera. Le Coucher De La Mariee did receive many remakes, and one from 1907 does remain today, but the original from 1896 is still missing and incomplete.